my name is khaiz ehsa 259102, and today I'm going to be presenting about why we should not choose a private company as for our permanent job. Did you guys know what is a private company, or commonly known as a private sector? A private company is a company that principal to the profits of the organization. Private companies also belong to the chain by a privatization policy called the private sector. According to a report by Ministry of Malaysia Human Resources, private labour now reach almost 65.6%, comprising skilled labour. But how come the private sector now has successfully gained a lot of employees? This is because the work that has been done by these private companies, mostly they are only want to promote their sales materials, involving with a lot investment that they make involved in the sale of goods and purchases of shares, as well as a commodity transaction. And that is why the private sector for current circumstances also been a choices for young people. They assume that the salaries are more higher than the government sector. According to the Economic Planning Unit, there have been many transfer of private workers to the government sector or even unemployed. The things that shocked me the most, around 2018 until 2019, more than 58% of workers have changed their employment sectors. Although these jobs in the private sector provide very high salaries and bonuses to their employee, but there are still many problems that occur among these employees under the private sector. And I am truly vital confident that those jobs under the private sector, salaries and their bonuses are more efficient and satisfied. But there are a lot of the weaknesses that we can discuss together. The conclusion is, don't be too quick or to be fooled by a job that related with a huge promotion. This is because although a job provides many advantages, but there are still many disadvantages. So today, I'm going to be talking about 3 things why we cannot make the private sector as our permanent job. Let us move on to my first indicator. My first indicator is why we shouldn't have to choose the private company as for our permanent job. We are going to get a very difficulty in obtaining an ancillary of any facilities. Did you guys know a private employee now mostly consisted with skilled workers and semi-skilled workers? And among these, the difficulties that can be enjoyed by these private employees, they have to face a lot of procedure to get an emergency leave or even an unchanged vacation. Why these things keep happen? It's because of the vacation is a basic need for every employee, whether that employees are working under the government or private sector. But here, the issue of requesting leave to employers in the private sector is something that they would like to do if the holiday schedule has been enshrined in the company's constitution. But then, all leaves procedure must be required to the constitution of the company, and it cannot be easily to apply. If there is an employee who violates this regulation, I believe they will be easily advocated by the law that has been provided. As you guys information, the privatization policy also didn't have any article to discuss on these leaves if the decision had been enshrined under the employer. Therefore, private employees often have difficulty on applying for a vacation in the private sector, but they also often find it difficult to get a regular incentive as well as a salary increases. It's because of those employees in the private sector also find it difficult to get fixed incentive within a set salary if the requested leave has violated limited working on our limit. And here, I am pretty sure many of you guys are wondering why the disadvantages are so tight towards the leave requestion. Firstly, they are not be able to make any bargaining session with respect to salary level because it's already been fixed. Secondly, monthly bonuses and incentives are only according to their attendance rate during working hours, and most positions in the private companies are based on the contracts and job limits, which are more likely to be seen through the rate of time for intense only on working hours. And lastly, this contract may be avoided according to the constitutional unit of the company with a majority decision. In conclusion, their welfare towards leave applications is often neglected by the company. This is because of why? This is because of they only need to follow the basics of principles that have been provided by the company only without having any advantages as employee. My second point is I'm going to be talking about gender discrimination in the private sector. As you guys information, according to Professor Zahaya Munira, Human Resources of Worker Entry Pattern Malaysia Analyst, Universiti Kebangsaan Malaysia, the culture in the private company is not very concerned with the relationship between employees, but the most important assessment is the level of resilience and also the credibility of an individual in performing their work. When we talk about gender discrimination in the private sector, there were two main issues that I would like to be highlight and give more focus. Why we shouldn't have to choose a private company as for our permanent job. Firstly, you are going to be facing a lot of issues that related with the discrimination against women. Why I mentioned that? Did you guys know the discrimination against women in the private sector are often occurs? This is because they are often stigmatized, looked as a people who doesn't have any resilience in the workplace. Hence, women nowadays are also face a negativity discrimination where they will have a difficulty in being promoted because they have to compete with men. First, these women are often synonymous with problems in any sector of employment. Secondly, they also have to compete with men also. If we look at abroad, many countries are practicing indifferences to the role of the woman in the economic development sector. Here, I feel very sorry for the women. This is because of why? This is because of they have to face many twists and turns and processes to achieve success. And I believe, due to these obstacles, women in Malaysia are now very difficult to achieve their success at the maximum level. This is because of why their careers as women are often blocked and manipulated by third parties. Next, the second main issue is I wanted to give a focus about maternity leave issue. Did you guys know to get a maternity leave issue in the private sector is not the easy thing that you can do. Hence, most women can be terminated if they violate the limitations leaves given. As you guys information, maternity leave limit in the government sector is provided within 90 days. But in the private sector, they are free to determine the amount of maternity leave for women who have just given birth. But if we view on how United States manage to their private worker, especially women, they will prioritize the problems and needs of women who have already given birth with a maternity leave period with 19 days, and they will also be given a leave according to the replacement of leave that has never been applied by them before. Husbands also will be given a spare leave to be able to focus on wives who are still in abstinence after childbirth. You see the differences between the Malaysia private management and the overseas. The conclusion is the perception and action that often bring down women need to be eliminated. The reason why I told you this, they also have humanitarian values that need to be kept as well, as they are also worthy to be treated fairly. My last indicator, I'm going to be talking about employment sector that doesn't guarantee you for a stable infrastructure. Did you guys know for a private employee, they will not have a stable retirement in terms of setting the last salary level when they retire? The reason why these private employees are only depending on the EPF and SOCSO, and they doesn't have any life contract that contribute as in the government sector worker. This is because of Malaysia nowadays, the Malaysia privatization policy still didn't provide a permanent guideline for a private employee, because they know that the company's capacity can always contribute to the welfare of employees, while actually the truth, the welfare of these private employees are often been neglected by the certain constitutional company. Therefore, they also doesn't have any regular working hours until the retirement. Why? Did you guys know private employees can be laid off at any time, and this enactment has been subjected in the privatization policy. Private employees need to follow the production system by the company for each savings along the way with the time to set under the private sector. Then, the privatization policy mostly in accordance with the constitutions of the company itself unless the issue is brought to court and the regulations are fixed and it cannot be changed. And that is why the private sector workers are always stuck at the savings withdrawal when they have to sign the retirement approval. And as for the conclusion, I have included some weaknesses and the disadvantages why we shouldn't have to choose a private company as our permanent job. And finally, with the problems and constraints that have been narrated, it can be concluded that the selection for an individual into the private sector is a very inconsistent thing, and you guys must be thinking it for twice for the choices that you have made. All of you can choose a private organization to be started as a permanent job, but it must be based on a very careful observation of the background towards the private company. The phrases to get a good life opportunity while working under a private company is actually correct, but the only issue that becomes the main problem is when these workers can or cannot create their lives in the private sector. Why? We need to accept the fact that such of an interesting job can sometimes easily to undermine humanity and make the people lose their needs and forget